Between the crests of Red Rock and the endless dry brush, a hunter was roasting a boar when she appeared. Elric saw her standing at the edge of his camp. Gorna, a massive young orc, skin bright green, eyes hollow with hunger. He tore the leg from the spit and handed it over without hesitation. The next morning, 300 orc warriors surrounded his ranch. The valley of Korath was no place for anyone afraid of silence. It sat deep and dry, squeezed between the Red Rock canyons and a flat plain that the wind swept clean every single day. There were no neighbors, no real road, just a dirt trail heading south toward Bravar, the nearest town, 2 days on horseback. Elric Vane liked it exactly that way. He had built the cabin with his own hands, board by board, stone by stone, in a clearing between 2 low hills. It was small and solid, and smelled of cured leather and old smoke. Outside stood the iron spit where he roasted his kills. Inside was everything a lone man needed: a hard bed, a table, a rifle hung on the wall, and a knife on his belt. Elric was a hunter, not a bounty hunter. That was dirty work he had left behind years ago, when he was younger and less tired. Now he hunted boar, deer, and large rabbits in the canyon foothills, cured the hides, sold the leftovers in Bravar, and came back. Simple as that. That afternoon, the boar on the spit smelled right. Fat dripped onto the coals, and smoke rose straight in the still late-day air. Elric crouched near the fire, turning the spit slowly when he felt it. He heard nothing. He saw nothing yet, but he felt it, that cold needle at the back of the neck that warns you when someone is watching from a distance. He raised his eyes slowly. She stood at the edge of the camp, about 30 paces from the fire. Tall, very tall, over 2 meters, maybe more. Broad shoulders, muscular arms, skin bright green like wet jade. She wore a dark brown leather vest and a side-split animal hide skirt adorned with small bone beads and crystal fragments that caught the last sunlight. Her hair was black and thick, loose over her shoulders. Her ears ended in subtle points, and her eyes, large, dark, deep, were fixed on him with an expression Elric knew well. Hunger. Not the kind that makes you angry, the kind that makes you weak. She was standing through sheer will and nothing else. Elric stayed still for a moment. The rifle was inside, the knife was on his belt, but his hand did not move toward it. He looked at her face, really looked, and saw no threat. He saw someone who had walked very far and had nothing left. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. He grabbed the spit with both hands and tore the whole leg free, bone and all, the meat still steaming. He walked toward her without rushing and held it out. She looked at his hand, then at his face. Then she took it. She ate standing, fast but without noise, tearing the meat cleanly. Elric went back inside and came out with a tin cup filled with water from the jug. He set it on the ground between them and stepped back. She picked it up and drank it all in one motion. When she finished, she stood straight again. She was breathing steadier now. She looked at him one more time, not with gratitude, not with suspicion, just with something calm and measuring. And then she turned and walked into the hills of Korath without a single word. Elric watched her disappear into the dark shapes of rock and brush. The fire crackled behind him. The valley went quiet again, the way it always did. He cleaned the spit, banked the coals, and went to bed. He did not know her name yet. He did not know what clan she belonged to, or why she had been alone out there, or how far she had walked. He did not know that the small bone bead she wore at her wrist carried a mark that every orc in the Red Rock Canyons recognized on sight. And he did not know that by morning the hills around Korath would not be empty anymore. Elric woke before dawn, the way he always did. He pulled on his boots in the dark, buckled his belt, and pushed the cabin door open. The cold morning air hit him in the face. The sky above the canyon walls was still deep blue, just starting to lighten at the edges. His breath came out in small clouds. He took 3 steps into the yard and stopped. The hills were full of riders. They sat on horseback along every ridge surrounding the valley, north, south, east, west, perfectly still, perfectly spaced, like fence posts driven into the rock. He could not count them all in the low light, but there were many, more than 100 surely, maybe more than 2. Each one had a spear or a rifle resting across the saddle. Their silhouettes were enormous against the pale sky. Orcs, every single one of them. Elric stood in the middle of his yard with his hands open at his sides. He did not reach for his rifle. He did not step back toward the door. He just stood there and looked at the hills, and the hills looked back at him. The silence was total. Not one horse moved, not one warrior shifted in the saddle. It was the kind of stillness that took discipline and practice, the stillness of people who knew how to wait. Elric had seen standoffs before. He had been on both sides of them. He knew that the man who moved first moved wrong, so he stayed where he was, breathing slow, watching. The sun crept up behind the eastern canyon wall, and light poured down into the valley in one long gold wave. In that light, the warriors became clear. They wore leather and bone, hides dyed dark green and brown. Their skin was bright jade green, their hair long and dark, some braided, some loose. Their faces were hard and unreadable. They were not angry, they were not excited. They were simply present, the way a wall is present. Elric understood in that moment that he was not being attacked. He was being shown something. The difference mattered. He turned slowly, one full circle, looking at each ridge in turn. Then he faced north, where the ridge was highest and the line of warriors thickest. He raised one hand, palm open, and held it there. Nothing moved. He lowered his hand, walked back to the cabin, and built a fire. He put water on to boil and cut strips of dried meat into the pot. He worked slowly and without rushing, keeping his movements visible through the open door. If they were watching, and they were watching everything, they would see a man going about his morning without panic, because Elric Vane, whatever else he had been in his life, was not a man who panicked easily. He sat on the step outside the cabin with his cup and ate his breakfast, watching the ridges. The warriors did not move. The horses did not move. The valley of Korath held its breath. Somewhere up on the north ridge, one of those riders knew his name, or would soon. On the third morning of the siege, a single rider came down from the north ridge. Elric was splitting firewood at the side of the cabin when he heard the slow, measured sound of hooves on dry rock. He set the axe down and turned, keeping both hands in plain sight. The rider was old by orc standards. His jade skin had darkened slightly at the temples, and the lines of his face were deep and deliberate, like cracks in canyon stone. He was still enormous, still straight-backed in the saddle. He wore a vest of layered dark leather and a heavy bone torque around his neck hung with small carved totems. His eyes were the color of still water before a storm. He stopped his horse 50 paces from Elric and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then Gorna appeared from behind the ridge. She came down on foot, her posture nothing like the exhausted figure who had appeared at his campfire 3 nights before. Her black hair was braided tight against her head, threaded through with small crystals that clicked faintly as she walked. She wore a vest of fine leather over her shoulders, and a sash of woven material around her waist, hung with more clan markings. She stopped beside the rider's horse and spoke first, a low, guttural sound directed at the old warrior, then a shift into rough but clear words aimed at Elric. "This is Drac Vor," she said, "chief of the Grakthar." Elric kept his face steady. "He is your father," Elric said. It was not a question. Gorna did not blink. "He is my father." Drakvor had not moved his eyes from Elric's face. He spoke in the Grakthar tongue, deep, rolling sounds that Elric could feel more than understand. Gorna translated without expression. "You fed his daughter when she had nothing. You asked for nothing in return. You did not follow her. You did not take what you could have taken. He wants to know why." Elric thought about that for a moment. "Because she was hungry," he said. Gorna translated. Drakvor was quiet for a time. Then he said something short and turned his horse back toward the ridge. Gorna looked at Elric. "He says that is either the answer of a very honest man," she said, "or a very clever one." She paused. "He has not decided which." She turned and followed her father up the slope without looking back. Elric watched them go. The warriors on the ridges remained exactly where they were, still as stone. He picked up the axe and went back to splitting wood, because there was nothing else to do. The Grakthar stayed. By the fourth day, Elric had stopped counting the warriors on the ridges. They were simply there, the way the canyon walls were there, permanent and watchful and beyond argument. He continued his routine without changing a single part of it. He rose before dawn. He built his fire. He ate, worked, hunted in the near foothills, and returned before dark. He did not try to send word to Bravar. He did not hide anything or move anything inside the cabin. He lived exactly as he always lived. On the fourth afternoon, he came back from a short hunt with 2 rabbits and found something on his doorstep. A bundle wrapped in dried grass. He crouched and opened it carefully. Inside was a thick cut of smoked meat, darker and denser than anything he had, seasoned with something sharp and smoky he could not name, and a small clay jug sealed with wax. He uncorked the jug and smelled it, water clean and cold. He stood up and looked at the hills. No one was visible in that particular moment, but he knew they were there. He took the bundle inside, ate the meat that night, and found it was the best thing he had tasted in months. He did not know at the time that the gift had a name in Grakthar tradition. It was called the second offer, given only to someone the clan was considering worthy of watching more closely. The first offer was silence, the second was food. The third, if it came, meant something else entirely. Elric did not know any of this. He just knew that someone had left him a meal, and he was grateful for it. On the 5th day, he noticed that one of the North Ridge warriors had moved. Not gone, just shifted position slightly. Another had let his horse graze down the lower slope. Small changes. The stone stillness of the first days was softening, just barely at the edges. He did not read too much into it. He kept his movements slow and open and unhurried. He kept his rifle inside and his knife on his belt where it always was. He kept his fire visible at night. There was a place the locals called Hollow Pass, a narrow cut through the eastern ridge, 2 hours' ride from Korath, where the old dry riverbed ran between 2 walls of cracked rock. Elric had used it once as a shorter trail back from a hunt and had not thought much of it since. But he filed it away in the back of his mind now, the way a careful man files away details that might matter later, without knowing why. On the morning of the 6th day, he woke to the sound of horses on the southern trail. Not the heavy, measured movement of orc warhorses. Faster, lighter, urgent. He pulled on his boots, buckled his belt, and opened the door. Dust was rising on the Bravar trail. 6 riders, moving hard. They rode in like men who owned the ground under their horses. 6 of them, all human, all armed. They wore the kind of clothes that came from spending too much time in towns, clean enough to suggest comfort, worn enough to suggest danger, rifles in scabbards, pistols on hips, and the particular flat look in their eyes of men who did this kind of work for money and had done it long enough to stop thinking about it. Elric stood in the yard and waited for them. The lead rider pulled up hard and looked down at him from the saddle, with the manner of someone who expected doors to open before he knocked. "You Vane?" he said. "I am," Elric said. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He didn't hand it over, just held it up so Elric could see the official seal of Bravar on the outside. "Bounty warrants, Grakthar clan. Word is they're running through this stretch of canyon country. You seen anything?" Elric looked at the paper, then at the man, then at the 5 riders fanned out behind him, hands resting near their guns in that practiced, casual way that was never actually casual. "Haven't seen a soul out here in weeks," Elric said. "Just me and the jackrabbits." The lead rider looked at the yard, at the cabin, at the surrounding hills, which were empty of any visible warriors because the Grakthar had pulled back from the ridgelines at some point in the last hour. Elric did not know when or how, but they had, and he was quietly grateful for it. "Lot of horse tracks around here for a man living alone," the rider said. "Canyon country," Elric said. "Horses pass through." The man studied him for a long moment. The other 5 fanned out slightly. 2 toward the cabin door, 2 along the side, 1 staying back on the trail. They were covering angles. Professionals. "We'll make camp here tonight," the lead rider said. It was not a question. Elric nodded once. "Suit yourself." He went back inside and sat in the dark of the cabin and thought very carefully about what happened next, because whatever happened next was going to matter a great deal to a great many people. Outside, the 6 riders unsaddled and built a small fire in his yard. Their voices were low and businesslike. One of them laughed at something the others didn't react to. The hills around Korath were very quiet. The night stretched long and tense. Elric sat at his table in the dark, with a cup of water he didn't drink, listening to the sounds from the yard, the low murmur of the bounty hunters' voices, the occasional shift of horses, the pop of their small fire. He kept his own lamp unlit. He did not want light in the windows. Sometime past midnight, he heard a faint sound at the side wall of the cabin. 3 soft taps. The kind a knuckle makes when it is being very deliberate. He moved to the window on the far side and looked out through the gap in the shutter. Gorna was there, standing close against the wall, her outline barely visible in the darkness. She had come down from the hills alone and silent in the middle of the night, without making a sound that the 6 armed men in the yard had heard. Elric opened the shutter a crack. She leaned close and spoke in a voice just above a breath. "My father gives the signal at first light," she said. "If they are still in this valley when the sun touches the east wall, the warriors come down." Elric absorbed that. "How many would survive?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Some of yours might," she said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I'll get them out," he said. She pulled back without another word and disappeared into the dark as quietly as she had come. Elric sat back down at the table. He turned his cup slowly in his hands and thought. He needed a story. Not a lie exactly, as more like a trail. Something that pointed away from Korath convincingly enough to move 6 suspicious men before sunrise. He remembered Hollow Pass, the narrow cut through the eastern ridge, 2 hours' ride away, where the old dry riverbed ran between the rock walls. He had stored that detail away without knowing why. Now he knew why. He went outside an hour before dawn and crouched near the bounty hunter's fire, which had burned down to coals. The lead rider was on watch, half awake, rifle across his knees. Elric crouched next to him and kept his voice low and urgent. He told the man he had remembered something. A trapper who came through 2 weeks back said he had seen a large orc camp east of Hollow Pass, past the second ridge, where the old dry riverbed ran. Said there were fires there at night. He had not thought much of it at the time, but now, with warrants in play, it seemed worth saying. The lead rider was awake and alert within 30 seconds. He roused the others quietly, and they broke camp in the dark with the efficiency of men who had done it many times before. By the time the first grey light touched the canyon walls, they were already on the eastern trail, moving fast toward Hollow Pass. Elric stood in his empty yard and watched their dust fade. The east wall caught the sun. The valley stayed silent. By midday, the ridges were empty. Not in the way they had been empty before the warriors arrived. Not the ordinary emptiness of a quiet valley. This was different. This was the deliberate withdrawal of something large and organized, leaving behind only stillness and the faint impression of having been there. Hoofprints in the dust at the ridgeline, a spot of flattened grass on the north slope, a single crystal bead lying near the cabin step that Elric almost missed. He picked up the bead and turned it in his fingers. It was the same kind Gorna wore, braided into her hair. He set it on the table inside. Late in the afternoon, he heard one horse on the north path, one set of slow, deliberate hooves. No urgency. He went to the door. Drakvor came into the yard alone. He dismounted without help, tied his horse to the post near the water trough, and walked to the cabin door as if he had done it 100 times before. He was not armed beyond the long knife at his hip, which he had not reached for and would not. He ducked his head under the cabin doorframe and stood inside, looking at the small space with an expression that revealed nothing. Gorna came in behind him. She must have been waiting on the slope. She took her position at her father's side and watched Elric's face. Drakvor reached into the fold of his vest and set something on the table. A cord necklace, hand-knotted, hung with small painted beads, dark blue, bone white, and deep green, arranged in a repeating sequence. From the center hung a flat carved piece of dark bone, etched with the mark of the clan, a split tusk resting inside a circle. He spoke. Gorna translated. "This is a mark of the Grakthar," she said. "Any orc in the canyon country who sees it will know you are under the clan's protection. It does not make you one of us. It means you chose right when it was hard to choose right. That is enough." Drakvor looked at him directly for a long moment. Then he said one more thing, brief and low. Gorna translated quietly. "He says you fed his daughter with your last piece of meat. He did not tell you that was the last one on the spit." She paused. He was watching from the ridge even then. Elric looked at the necklace on the table. He picked it up and put it around his neck. Drakvor nodded once. Not a bow, not a gesture of submission, just an acknowledgement between equals, and walked out of the cabin. He untied his horse, mounted and rode north without looking back. Gorna stayed one moment longer. "He doesn't say that to anyone," she said. Then she followed her father up the slope. By the time the sun touched the western canyon wall, the valley of Korath was quiet in the way Elric had always loved, the ordinary quiet of a place that belonged only to itself. He sat outside on the step as the stars came out one by one above the canyon walls. 3 weeks passed. Elric rode to Bravar to sell hides, the way he did every month. He wore the necklace under his shirt, out of sight. He did not talk about what had happened in Korath. He drank his 1 cup at the saloon, bought his supplies, and rode back before dark. The 6 bounty hunters were in town. He saw them at the dry goods counter, restocking. The lead rider caught his eye across the room and gave him a long look, the kind that said he had found nothing at Hollow Pass and was still thinking about why. Elric held the look without expression, paid for his flour and salt, and walked out. On the ride back through the canyon trails, he passed a narrow defile between 2 rock faces, the kind of tight spot where a man alone did not like to linger. He pushed his horse through at a steady pace and came out the other side into open ground. On a boulder at the edge of the path sat a small bundle of dried sage, tied with a strip of dark leather. He almost missed it. He stopped his horse and looked at it without touching it. It had not been there on the ride in. He did not know the Grakthar tradition of leaving a trail marker for a person under clan protection, a small sign left in a place where danger had recently passed to say, "We saw it, it is gone, you are clear." But he understood, without needing the words, that someone had been watching the defile while he was in Bravar. Someone had made sure the lead rider's long look was the only threat he faced on the road home. He left the bundle where it was and rode on. Korath was the same when he arrived. Cabin solid, fire pit cold, hills empty. He unsaddled the horse, put the supplies away, and built a fire as the evening came down over the canyon. He sat on the step with the necklace out now, resting against his chest. He turned the carved bone piece in his fingers, feeling the shape of it, the raised edges of the split tusk, the smooth circle around it. He thought about Gorna standing exhausted at the edge of his camp, running on nothing. He thought about Drakvor on his horse at dawn, surrounded by 300 warriors, watching a lone man eat breakfast and not run. He thought about the choice, which had not felt like a choice at all when he made it, just a hungry person and a piece of meat. He put another log on the fire and watched the sparks float up into the dark sky above the canyon walls. Some things were simple, he thought. You fed someone who was hungry. That was the whole story. He did not know yet that word was spreading along the canyon trails, not loudly, not quickly, but the way important things always spread in quiet country, from rider to rider, from camp to camp, steady and sure. A human hunter in the valley of Korath wears the mark of the Grakthar, chose right when it was hard. The seasons turned in Korath, the way they always had. The deep summer heat broke in the high canyon passes, and the mornings began to carry that faint coolness that came before the cold months. Elric laid in wood, cured the last of the autumn hides, and patched the cabin roof where a stone had loosened near the chimney. He worked steadily and without rush, the way a man works when he is at peace with his place. The bounty hunters did not come back. He heard, on his next trip to Brava, that the warrants on the Grakthar had been quietly dropped. Something about a disputed jurisdiction, a clerk's error in the paperwork, the kind of bureaucratic confusion that sometimes resolved itself when the right people decided not to push a thing any further. He did not know who had applied what pressure, and he did not ask. He bought his supplies. He rode home. Korath was his, the way it had always been his. A patch of dry valley between old canyon walls, with a small solid cabin and a fire pit, and room enough for one man and his thoughts. Except that it was different now in ways that were hard to put into words. The trails he rode felt less empty, not because anything was following him, nothing was, but because he knew the country was watched by eyes that had decided, after 6 days of careful observation, that he was someone worth watching over. That knowledge sat quietly inside him, not heavy, not light, just present. One morning, in the first week of the cold season, he opened the cabin door and found something on the step. Not food this time. A flat piece of stone, smooth and dark, carved on one side with the clan mark of the Grakthar, and on the other side with something new. A small shape he had to look at twice before he understood it. A single human boot print, etched deep into the rock, sitting inside the circle, beside the tusk. He turned it over in his hands for a long time. He did not know who had left it, or when. He did not know what ceremony or decision had led to the addition of that mark. He only knew what Gorna had told him. The necklace meant he had chosen right. Whatever this stone meant, it seemed to mean something more, as if the clan had decided that his boot, his presence, his solitary campfire in the valley of Korath now belonged to the same circle as the tusk. He set it on the table inside, next to the single crystal bead he had found weeks ago. Then he built his fire, boiled his water, and ate his breakfast on the step the way he did every morning. Watching the canyon walls fill slowly with light, the ridges quiet and clear above him, the valley of Korath breathing easy around him. He had come here years ago, looking for a place where nothing would ask anything of him. He had found that for a while, and then a hungry stranger had walked out of the dark hills and changed the shape of things without either of them meaning to. He was all right with that. The fire burned steady. The canyon was still. High above the north ridge, a hawk turned in a slow circle against the pale morning sky, riding the air with no particular urgency, going nowhere and everywhere at once. Elric watched it until it drifted out of sight behind the canyon wall. Then he stood up, put his cup inside, and got on with the day. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-Bound Legacy.